So in chapter 3, we're now dealing with really the heart of any economics course, and that would be supply, demand, and market equilibrium. Just to review, what we had done in the previous chapter, chapter 1, is we had, as an introduction, looked at how economists think about the world and what they assume and what the results are sometimes used to define. So in other words, that we said that economists believe or assume that individuals and firms are either utility maximizing or profit maximizing, that individuals or firms are rational, and that they compare their marginal benefits to their marginal costs of doing something. And we talked about how economists then understand that world where firms and consumers exist as one where there is scarcity, where there's unlimited wants and needs but only limited resources to fulfill them. So the reason why this chapter is then so important is because this chapter then represents the first kind of representation of how economists think about the world. By that I mean, from the demand side, we're going to see consumers existing right here. The consumers are the ones that are purchasing products. Let me turn this light on here, might make it a little easier. And that for the supply, here we're talking about the firm and how the firm exists. And that what we look at in the equilibrium is how those two come together. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at demand and supply as they come together in market equilibrium. Okay, so let's start. This demand and supply is going to be understood with a market framework. And in that market framework, we're looking at then that combination of buyers and sellers coming together in a certain setting. Let me try to remove this flicker here. Now, what that means here is that these markets where individuals exist, this can be either a local, national, or international market. That doesn't matter. But the market is for a single product. Let's take like purple pens, right? There's a market for purple pens. And in that market, there are buyers and sellers who are interacting in that marketplace setting. The most important result from a market is the price. I'll repeat that again. The most important piece of information that comes from a market is the price. There is just something beautiful about a market, and that beautiful thing about a market is that prices are not dictated by anyone, right? For instance, I really like lime Tostito chips. Now, not everyone likes lime Tostito chips, but if I had to say how important they are and what their value should be, I probably would place a really high value on them if I was the person selling them, because I love them so much and I think they're so great. I'd put a very high value on them. But if no one wanted them, then that price is not justified. Now, it can go the other way as well, right? Consumers can really want something that a firm doesn't really care a great deal about. The thing that's beautiful about both of those examples I gave you is that the price is being determined by that interaction process, not by the buyers being so powerful that they can dictate the price, and not by the seller being so powerful that they dictate the price, or by the government saying that price is wrong, this is what the price should be. it's what the price is what it is, because that's what buyers and sellers have come to an agreement about. As a counterexample to this, whatever you believe about the minimum wage, you can either be for it or against it. Quite frankly, what my personal beliefs are about it shouldn't matter to you, and your beliefs about it, they don't matter to me in the sense that part of that's politically inspired. But let me just talk about it from an economic standpoint. From an economic standpoint, minimum wages are a bad thing. This is, again, purely from an economic standpoint. Because in that case, the government is dictating what the price of a worker should be. That they should get, right, $7.25 or $7.65 an hour. Right? And that isn't right. I mean, it's not right. It's not how markets should be. It's not surprising that most jobs pay far more than the minimum wage, right? So the minimum wage only affects a small set of individuals. And for those small set of individuals it affects, I think in many cases we believe that it would have been their wage otherwise, even if of course firms always want to pay as little as possible. Of course workers always want to get as much as possible. But again, that's where that negotiation occurs, right? If UH West Oahu or Leeward or whoever said they were going to pay me $1,000 to teach a course, I'd say, no way, I'm not going to do it, right? And now we've got the setting of an interaction occurring, right? Me as the seller of my labor service, I'm saying, I'm not willing to sell it for $1,000. Whereas Leeward would say, yeah, we're willing to buy your course from you and sell it to students, and we're going to pay you $1,000, but I'm not going to do it. Now, maybe they'll find another economist who's willing to do it, right? Just like maybe I could find someone willing to do a job for $5 an hour, right? Let's say someone under the table, ex-convict, or right, someone who likes to steal company property, right? Maybe I could get them to earn a little bit less than the federal minimum wage, right, and the state minimum wage. Not that I'm opposed to the minimum wage for social reasons or political reasons, but I'm opposed to it as an economist because it sidesteps this market. Let's talk about this more. First side of this is the demand. The demand is what's coming from the consumer. Now we can have both an individual consumer. These individuals sum up to be a market demand. And the assumption we're going to employ in this is called ceteris paribus, or all other things equal. And what this demand curve is going to do, that is really annoying. Again, I'm going to try to remove this here. That what we're seeing here then in this demand relationship is this idea that how are consumers depending on the price to determine how much they're going to buy. Looking ahead here, here's what we're saying. Here's my demand. In an informal way, it's a question of how much it's a question of how much will I or can I buy? How much will I or can I buy? And then adding the phrase at a particular price. So that's the first part of this. There's a second part of this. And then the third part of this is all other things being equal. So the definition of demand, which is consumers buying stuff, is really a three-part definition. And here's how I want you to think of it again. It's the question of how much will I or can I buy? So will I is implying that I have a preference to buy it, right? That I would want that thing. The can I is saying something about, do I have the ability to buy it, right? Do I have the income to buy it? So it's a question of what quantity or how much will I, can I buy at a particular price, all other things being equal. What are all these other things? Well, there are lots of things that affect demand. Things other than the price. And what we're going to say is that those things are not changing. Everything else is going to be held constant, and we're only going to say if the price is X, let's say $5, how much would you and could you buy? What tends to be the case, if we look at that three-part definition that we just outlined, is that all of the things being equal, or ceteris paribus, this is the Latin way of saying all of the things being equal, that what tends to happen is that as the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. I want you to pay particular attention to how I just wrote out the part about the quantity demanded. And by that, what I did there was I wrote Q subscript D to imply quantity demanded. And in the quantity demanded part to this, what we're saying here is that that in terms of the quantity demanded, we're talking about a particular point. And that as the price rises, the quantity demanded, or Q subscript D, falls. What we're seeing here is an inverse relationship. P goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Quantity demanded falls, price rises, right? Price rises, quantity demanded falls. The reasons for this, again, I didn't make these slides. I'm kind of, in some sense, I'm just kind of reading these here. But in the one sense, it says the reason is common sense. Yeah, I guess it's true. I don't know if I would exactly use those terms because it implies that if you don't get it, you don't have common sense. But the idea here is that when things are cheaper, we tend to buy more of things. And when things are more expensive, we tend to buy less of it in general. So it also gets at this idea of the law of diminishing marginal utility. That as I buy more and more of something, I tend to want something less and less. And it also gets at this idea of the income effect and substitution effects. Effects that we'll get to talk about a little bit later here. But what, I mean, I guess on some level, what you can just remember for right now is that think of your own purchasing habits. And in your own purchasing habits, at least, it would seem to make sense that you would buy more of something if it was cheaper and less of something if it was more expensive. That would be the less of something if it's more expensive, the more of something if it was cheaper. So here's what it looks like. Now, this is a single market. In this case, it is for lattes. Very fancy. And what exists here is the price on the y-axis and the quantity on the x-axis. And what you're seeing here is that inverse relationship between price and quantity. And in that inverse relationship between price and quantity, the shorthand for this being the law of demand, what we just talked about on the previous slide, is that when prices are higher, that the quantities are lower. And that when the price is lower, that the quantities are higher. That is showing the inverse relationship. The collection of those points is your entire demand curve. And then you could plot out these points as well. Single market, downward sloping, that downward sloping nature shows us the law of demand. And then what we do for market demand is, again, we just add up the individuals. Joe and Sarah and Mike, right? And we say that at $5, if Joe wants 10 and Sarah wants 12 and Mike wants 8, then we can add up 10 and 12 and 8 and get 30. Right? And so on and so forth. Or in other words, that we can add up their individual demand curves to get an entire market demand curve. I don't think I need to say much more beyond that. That the relationships that exist for the market demand curve are exactly the same, that there is a law of demand that applies here and here and here, and then it will extend to here. Demand curves in their most simplest sense, they're always downward sloping, and that is because of that law of demand. So, what I just explained, I'm going to just do kind of like a, let me put it on a separate piece of paper here. What we just explained with the law of demand was a way of talking about movements along the demand curve. And what we were saying there if I put P and Q and I put a single market for, God, that is, I'm really sorry, class. I don't know why it keeps doing this weird thing there. Well, maybe that makes it better. That for the law of demand, in those movements along the demand curve, that let's say the price of something was $10. That as the price changes from $10, let's say, to $2. So as the price falls from $10 to $2, that now the quantity demanded would be higher. And we can see that very clearly here. But this is a movement along the demand curve, right? The demand curve itself did not shift. Rather, I moved along the demand curve because the quantity demanded increased. As I went from 10 to 2, the quantity demanded increased. That is our law of demand. And that is explaining our movement along the demand curve. Now, to counter this, what we're trying to do here now is talk about the changes in demand. And in the changes in demand, what we're now saying for the changes in demand is that now something else must be changing. Something else other than the price. It's not the price that's changing. It's something other than the price that's now changing. Now, instead of a movement along the demand curve, right? So if we started like labeling some points here, A, B, C, D, I would move from A to B or B to A by changing the price. But what we're saying now is that to go from C to, let's say, E would imply that I have to change something other than the price to get a change in the demand. And if I move to a point to the right, that's going to signify an increase in demand. If I move to the left, that's going to signify a decrease in demand. I want to be very precise in the words that I'm using here, and I want you to listen very carefully to the words I'm using here. To go from A to B, is an increase in the quantity demanded. I'm going from 2 to 4 in terms of quantity demanded. Notice that added word of quantity demanded. That's saying that there's a movement. C to E is an increase in demand. So by not having the quantity demanded, that's now saying that this is a shift in demand. And to get the movement from C to, the shift from C to E, I have to be changing something other than the price of the product itself. What would that thing then be? What would it that I'd have to do to get to go from C to E? Or from C to F, right, to get that decrease? What would I have to do? Well, that would mean I would need to change something other than the price. And there's lots of things I can change here, and that's the point of slides 9 and 10. One thing I could do is I could change people's tastes and preferences for a product. So, for instance, I saw this movie, this really cool movie, this documentary 2 weeks ago. And he was talking about, the name of the movie was like, Who Killed the Electric Car? And it was talking about how General Motors, the people that make Chevy and GMC trucks and things like that, how General Motors had made an electric car, a really cool electric car in the late 90s. And that in the early 2000s, they stopped making the car. And there was this whole controversy in the movie of like, oh, General Motors just likes to sell gasoline cars because they make more money that way, and they don't like selling electric cars. But there was the economist in me that really got grumpy about this whole conspiracy thing. Like, there's a side of me of that, like, in the late 90s, early 2000s, gasoline was like, what? Like, it was really cheap. It was really, really cheap. Like $1.75 a gallon. If we compare it not to this most recent past when oil prices have been much lower, but if we compare it to like 2006, 2007, when gasoline was $3-4 a gallon, like when gas is cheap, people don't want to buy electric cars. Plus, they were a new technology, so they were unreliable. There wasn't as many places to charge it. There was a decrease in demand. People just didn't want to buy electric cars. I mean, there had to be at least some part of it. So if I talk about what would I have to do to get an increase in demand, I'll write for all these, I'll write the increase. You can just do the opposite for the decrease. To get an increase in demand, I'd have to have, I guess, I don't know how else to write it, but let's say increased tastes and preferences towards the product. People wanting it more. Change in number of buyers to get an increase in demand. Quite simply, I need more buyers. Right? More buyers is going to change this for me and get an increase in demand if there are more people who are willing to buy the good than were previously. A great way to get an increase in demand for electrical generators would be if the power goes out, right? Because now you got more people that want to buy generators for their car, right? For their house, to keep their house running, right? Whereas the demand for space heaters in Hawaii is incredibly low. So there's not a lot of buyers there. For change in income, to be able to say how to get a change in demand if I change the income, it's important to distinguish between normal goods and inferior goods. Normal goods, this is like, I don't know, 90% of goods. In the vast majority of goods, you buy more of them as you get more income. That's the vast majority of goods. As my income goes up, I buy more houses. As my income goes up, I get more cars. As my income goes up, I buy more food. As my income goes up, maybe I have even more kids, right? All these things go up. Obviously, I'm not buying kids, I guess. I buy more stuff for my kids. As my income goes up, I buy more things. But there is a set of goods that are called inferior goods. Examples of this would be like bus rides. As my income goes up, I actually probably start riding the bus less, right? I don't know about you, but store brand mac and cheese does not taste the same as the name brand of mac and cheese. What was like the first thing I did as I got my first job? I stopped buying the Walmart brand of mac and cheese and started buying the name brand. So, right, that's an inferior good. Now, if I lost my job, I'd start buying it. If I lost my job, I'd start riding the bus. So for normal goods, increase in demand. For a normal good, I get higher income. For an inferior good, I'd have lower income. So what I'm all writing out here is that if we looked at that previous slide right here, and I wanted to go from C to E, I think I've deduced what causes the... There we go. If I wanted to talk about what causes my movement from C to E, the increase in demand, I would have to do one of these things. Give people a greater taste and preferences for the good. Have more buyers exist. Have higher income if it was a normal good. Lower income if it was an inferior good. So again, changes in demand is saying something other than the price is changing. Let's look at more of these. I could also change the price of related goods. If I change the price of related goods, there's two kinds of relationships that exist. There are goods that are complements, These are goods that are used together. Substitutes are goods that are replacements to each other. So complements. An example of that would be something like for instance, something like bicycles and bike helmets, right? They're used together when we're talking about goods. So sorry, I'm just trying to improve this even more here. So if I tell people that they're going to buy more bicycles, then people will buy more helmets because they are buying more bicycles. So people aren't just going to buy bikes without buying a helmet. People aren't going to just buy helmets without buying a bike. So people buying more helmets will mean that they will buy more bikes because they're going to have to use their helmets with something. Substitutes. These again are the things that are used as replacements. So like oranges and clementines, for instance. My demand for oranges is particularly influenced by the price of clementines. So if we go back to then my increase in demand, here's what we're saying. Let's just do bikes and bike helmets as our example here. As the price of bike helmets fall, what we know from the law of demand is that the quantity demanded of helmets will rise. We know that from the law of demand, that people will want more helmets because they are cheaper. But then what we're also saying is that the demand for bikes will go up because these are complementary goods, meaning that the price of bike helmets went down. People bought more helmets, but because they bought more helmets, they also then wanted to buy more bikes. Meaning, if we go back to this right here, I get my movement or my change from C to E by changing the price of a complementary good by lowering it. Alternatively, if we use oranges and clementines as our substitutes, if I raise the price of clementines, the quantity demanded of clementines will fall. That's a law of demand issue. But then we're saying that because clementines and oranges have that particular kind of relationship, that substitute relationship, just like here, because helmets and bikes had that particular kind of relationship, a complementary relationship. But here, if people are buying fewer clementines, they still got the need for oranges, right, or citrus. So in this case now, my demand for oranges increases. My demand for oranges was affected by something other than the price of oranges. Just like here, my demand for bikes was affected by something other than the price of bikes. And then, for my changes in consumer expectations, right, I could say that people will buy more or less depending on how they think the future price will be, or that people will buy more or less depending on what they think their future income will be. If people think the future price will be higher, then they will buy more now. If they think their future income will be higher, they will also buy more now. Slide 11 then is an incredibly important slide to be knowledgeable of. If these two bullet points make sense to you, and by that I mean if what they are saying you then understand the previous 3 or 4 slides, if these two bullet points make complete sense to you right now. Right? That this is saying here is that changing demand is like that shift from C to E. To do that, that would mean I'm looking at slides. Something that's on slides 9 and 10, the previous slide and the slide before that. One of those kinds of things are going on. I'm changing my income. I'm changing the price of a substitute good. Something other than the price itself is changing. Here, this is my law of demand. This is like moving from A to B. If we're talking about what's on slide, what is that? On slide 8. That's a change in the quantity demanded. This is a change in demand. So that's the demand side of this equation. Now let's look at the supply side of this equation. In the supply side of this equation here, the discussion is rather similar, except now we're looking at it from the perspective of the firm, the one that's supplying the products. And here we're looking at what they're willing and able to do at a certain price. There's going to be individuals that then add up to be a market. So this discussion is going to be rather similar here. Let's start out with then the law of supply. And for this, our law of supply, I'm trying to get, for the law of supply, what's happening then is that as the price changes, people sell more or less of it based only on that variable. Other things being equal, or ceteris paribus. Why does this happen? Why do firms sell more when the price goes up and sell less when the price goes down? Well, just think about how firms act, right? They want to get as much money as they can. And they don't want to sell that much if they're not going to make that much. The other side of this is that if costs are changing, they need to charge a certain price to be able to make the money that they have. So if the costs are going up, they do have to charge more to be able to sell the product. That's our law of supply. What does that explain? That explains a supply curve. Here, again, single market, the market for lattes. I've got my quantity on the x-axis, my price on the y-axis, and now I have a description for my law of supply of a direct relationship existing. A relationship existing where at the price of $5, firms are willing to sell a lot. And at a very low price, firms are not willing to sell a lot. That upward sloping nature of the curve is my law of supply. There's then again a difference between the movement along the curve as well as the shift of the curve. If I were to add some points on here, A, B, C, D, and E, I can get a movement from A to B, for instance, by raising the price will raise or increase the quantity supplied. That's our law of supply. How could I get something other than, like, what would it look like if I were going from D to F? D to F is something outside of the law of supply, something other than the law of supply. That's an increase in supply. A to B is written out again as increase in the quantity supplied. D to F would be written out as my increase in supply. Something other than the price is going to have to be changing to get this increase in supply or the decrease in supply. That's the point of these next two slides here. What would those other things be? Well, in this case here, we're just doing it on a single slide here. In terms of supply, let's talk about all the things that would cause the increase again, and then you can do the reverse to understand the decrease. Is that if I lower to get an increase in supply, if I lower the resource prices, that makes it cheaper for firms to get what they need. Like, for instance, if I'm running a gas station and it's cheaper for me to buy oil, then I can make more gas and sell more gas, right, at each and every price, which would mean that's going to be my increase in supply. If technology gets better, as it often does, that means that firms are going to be able to supply more of the products. If there are more sellers, that's going to increase my supply curve. If there are lower taxes or higher subsidies, subsidies are when the government pays you money to do something, or if the taxes are lower, the supply curve will increase. Changing the price of other goods, well, that's a pretty bad way of, it's a pretty bad bullet point. I don't think I would have written it that way. Firms also have substitutes and complements, right? So here's an example of this. If I am, let's just stick with this car example here. If I were General Motors, that would mean that the same assembly line that can make cars can also make trucks, right? I mean, on some level, cars and trucks are not that different. So if that's the case, then, right, I am greatly affected, if I'm the firm. How many cars I decide to produce is dependent upon what the price of trucks are. So, if the price of a substitute in production is falling, meaning that if firms can make cars or trucks, but cars are not making them a lot of money, right? The price of the substitutes, cars, is not making them a lot of money, then they're going to make more trucks. I'll repeat that again. If a company can make cars or trucks using the same workers and same assembly line, etc., and if the price of those cars keeps falling further and further down, then firms are going to say, why would I make a car then? I'm just going to make trucks. We also have the complementary goods. When firms make some things, they make other things as a byproduct of it. So for instance, if you are drilling for oil, you oftentimes also produce natural gas as a byproduct of drilling for oil, which means then that firms can sell both products. Or for instance, if I'm selling lumber, I'm also like making sawdust, right? In sawdust, you can use it for like, I don't know, what do you use sawdust for? Mopping up oil, toddlers vomiting? I don't know. Right, but we use sawdust for certain things, just like or like for like if you have like a gerbil or like a hamster or a guinea pig, right? You use like wood shavings. Well, those are things that can be sold. And if I'm going to supply more lumber, I would be willing to do that if my complementary good, the price of it was rising. If people really want sawdust or wood shavings or whatever, and they want more of them, then I'm also going to have to make more lumber. And the change in producer expectations is that if firms become more optimistic about the future of the economy, about how many people are going to want their product, that's also going to affect my supply curve here. Any of these things then would be my shift from D to F. Okay. If this slide makes perfect sense to you, you've now understood the difference between what I'm saying here. Of this is my law of supply. This is my movement along the supply curve. Here is my shift. Something other than the price. Law of supply, that's explaining, for instance, my movement from A to B. This here is my shift from D to F. Now, the cool part is that we have to bring all of these things together. And that's where we're going to get an equilibrium. Where there would be no tendency for change. It's where the curves meet. So if I write out this latte market, and I can already see it's on the back of this, but let's just write it out here. If I have my price of lattes, my quantity of lattes, here's my demand curve, here's my supply curve, they meet, and look at that. I get a price that lattes should sell for. And how many should be bought. The beauty of this market is that it is the thing that determines what the price is. Now we can have surpluses and shortages exist, and we'll see those on the next slide here. But again, the beautiful thing about the markets is that people buying stuff and firms selling stuff, the interaction of those two markets, or where they meet, that's the price that is going to tend to hold. What would happen if the price were too high? Then if the price were too high, let's say at $4, then the quantity supplied at $4 will be greater than the quantity demanded at $4. When quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, that is equal to a surplus. There's too much being produced. Down here, if the price were $2, so things were really, really cheap, comparatively speaking, then the quantity, the quantity supplied would be less than the quantity demanded. When quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, we now have a classic shortage situation. How can we see that here? At the price of $2, the quantity demanded is 11,000. At the price of $2, firms are willing to sell 4,000. The difference between those two, 11,000 minus 4,000 is 7,000. At the price of $4, consumers are willing to buy 4,000, but firms are willing to sell 10,000. The difference between 10,000 and 4,000 is 6,000. And that's our surplus versus our shortage. I don't know what else to say beyond this slide. The slide is pretty straightforward. I don't like to use this course as I don't want to use my lectures as me teaching you just about my beliefs about the world. It really should be me teaching you about economics. But, so for instance, I rent here on the islands. I do want to buy a house. And the thing that annoys me greatly is when people say to me that prices for homes in Hawaii are too high. And I cannot subscribe to that belief. It's that lots of people want to live in Hawaii and that there is only so much land there. And if the prices can't be unreasonable, there can't be a case of a shortage or a surplus, right? I mean, if anything, we could say there's not enough houses because the prices are too high. But like on some level, the price is given to us by a marketplace where people are free to sell their houses if they want to. And people don't have to buy a house if they don't want to. But if you put all of those forces together, the supply and the demand forces together, that's how you get $1 million houses in, right, or $1.5 million houses, right, just off of Kanaohe, right? Is $1.5 million too high? I mean, I wouldn't pay $1.5 million for a house, but that's me. But do I think that that's too high? No, it's given exactly by the market. It's not that any single seller can dictate that the price be $1.5 million, and consumers have to do it because they have no choice. Consumers do have a choice. They don't have to buy them, right? And it can go the other way as well, right? Sellers are not forced to sell their houses at certain prices. Consumers aren't forced to buy houses at certain prices. The market works, and the market determines the price. If you're unhappy with the result, that houses are $1 million, well, then we need intervention, right? Intervention by the government, intervention by maybe us as individuals in a society, like, kind of frowning upon certain practices, right? So, for instance, it can be legal for me to smoke cigarettes, right? I'm over 21. In the state of Hawaii, the age needed to be to smoke cigarettes. So if that's the case, right, I'm able to smoke, but it is certainly socially frowned upon, right? I can't smoke in certain public places. I can't, it's just difficult for me to smoke. I don't smoke anymore, right? But right, I can make it so that and I can raise the price even. I can say maybe the price isn't high enough. I'm just going to add lots of taxes to it to make it more expensive. But the beautiful thing about the market is that for the most part, people, individuals, and firms get to decide those things. Now the cool thing about the equilibrium is that it can then change. It can change based on how I change the demand curve, for instance. So if the demand increases, and again, remember, the demand is increasing by something other than the price. So for instance, greater preferences for the product. What happens, though, is that the equilibrium price goes up and the equilibrium quantity goes up. Supply curve staying the same, demand curve shifting out, because let's say that I have, as an example, let's say I have greater preferences for the product. I just picked something from those two slides that was talking about the factors that can increase demand. That as my demand increases, the equilibrium price goes up and the equilibrium quantity goes up. Let's just do the opposite. Less preferences for the product. Let's say a study comes out saying the product I'm selling is dangerous. Then the equilibrium price will fall and the equilibrium quantity will fall. So what's cool about this is that now I've created a situation where I can now tell you about certain scenarios, right? Like if I come out with a study, there's a reason why you probably have heard it multiple times. These studies that come out that say if you go to college, you'll earn more in your career. Well, what is that doing? That's creating a greater preference on your part to go to college. But what does that do? It means that more people go to classes, but it could also mean upward pressure on the price you pay for tuition or the price of certain products, right, that are used in education, like the textbooks and whatnot. How could I see it the other side? Right, this would be things like, what if I make it so that if I come out with more studies that say that smoking is bad, or I make it so that it's even harder to smoke. Well, the hope is that fewer people are going to smoke. The problem is that that does put downward pressure on the prices, right? And the state might not like that, so the state might raise taxes a bit so that it doesn't end up falling. But the key idea is that the quantity will be falling. Now I could also change the supply curve as well. So for instance, if I increase the supply curve, let's say that the technology is getting better, there'll be rightward shift of the supply curve, demand curve staying the same. What we'll tend to see here is that the equilibrium price is then falling, right? Because it used to be here and now it's here. The equilibrium price is falling and the equilibrium quantity is now rising. How can I get a decrease in supply? Let's say I have fewer sellers. Let's say that some of them go out of business. That would be a leftward shift of the supply curve, causing my equilibrium price to go up and my equilibrium quantity to go down. Now, as I've kind of implied here, you do get this idea that the government sometimes is unhappy with the price. And most of the time, the government is unhappy with the price being too high. So what they do is they set a price that's below the equilibrium price, where it's basically illegal to charge more. That is what a price ceiling law does. It's illegal to charge more. So the best way to think of this is like a house. The ceiling is the top of the house, and we're going to look at the opposing one, which is the floor, and that's the bottom of the house. Let's just focus on price ceilings here first. If it's illegal to charge more, the idea is that you can then tell people you will get this product far cheaper than you otherwise would. Now, the problem that this does is it creates illegal markets for the product, and it also creates this problem that there's basically not enough, so you're not sure how to exactly allocate it out. Let's look at this example here, and let me try to explain these bullet points here a little bit more with this picture that's on the next slide. So let's say the price of the product, let's say that it's milk. I know milk is more expensive here on the islands than $3.50, but let's just say it's milk. And we could say, you know what, milk is actually a really good thing for people to drink. It's calcium, it tastes good. Full disclosure, I was born in Wisconsin, so of course I'm in favor of milk in all of its ways. But I could say milk is such a great thing. People shouldn't have to pay $5 or even $3.50 here on the islands for milk. People should not have to pay that much. So I'm going to make it illegal to charge more than $3.50 a gallon. That's a price ceiling law. So now, or I'm going to say $3. It's illegal to charge more than $3. What that does is, even though the equilibrium is here, it forces the market to be stuck right there. Here's the problem. The problem is that now the quantity demanded will be perpetually and forever greater than the quantity supplied. And there's our problem. We have a perpetual or a forever shortage. How do I create a situation to resolve that, where there's people waiting in line to buy milk who can't get it? Well, the problem is that those people who really want milk are either then going to find an illegal way to get it, right? Someone saying, hey, I've got some milk sitting in the trunk of my car. I'm willing to sell it to you for $3.25. You just got to buy it out of the trunk of my car because this is a under-the-table transaction, right? But maybe you're getting sour milk, right, or not that great of milk. Well, that's a problem with a price ceiling. I just want to highlight then something else here. What if this were, again, a free market? If this were a free market and there was no price ceiling law, and the price were $3, in a shortage situation where the quantity demanded was greater than the quantity supplied, the shortage would have caused firms to raise their price. That's how firms usually react to a shortage, is say, wow, we're really selling a pretty great thing here. Let's just start racking up the price, right? Because we know we can charge more. And as the firm charges more and more, there's a movement along the supply curve, because, right, firms, as they can charge more and more, they're willing to sell more and more. But as the price goes up, consumers also will buy less. So as the price rises because of the shortage, then the quantity supplied, just make sure here, it's an S, not a D. The quantity supplied goes up, and the quantity demanded goes down until there's an equilibrium. This can happen when there's no price control. But if there's a price ceiling, none of that can happen. If there's a price ceiling, none of that can happen. Because in a price ceiling, the price is not allowed to increase. Rather, the shortage just always exists. Let me just do the other side of this here, just so that things are clear. I'll put this on your page. Actually, no, I can see that it's... let me do the other side of this, and then we'll look at the other way. Instead of a price ceiling, the other side of this would be a price floor. Price floor is when the price is kept artificially higher. The best example of this is the minimum wage, where employees are guaranteed to get $7.65 an hour or $7.25 an hour, whatever it is here in Hawaii. I don't earn the minimum wage, so I'm not entirely knowledgeable about. I think it's $7.65. If that's the case, the problem is that then it's illegal to charge or pay less. I can't hire a worker for $3 an hour. That's illegal in this market. As a floor, you can go no lower than the floor. So now the price is saying here you have to charge at least $3 an hour. I cannot pay 2. It is illegal in this market. The problem, as I've identified though earlier, is that the market is now stuck in a perpetual surplus. How would it have existed if there was a free market? Demand and supply. If the price had been $3, the quantity supplied would have exceeded the quantity demanded. Trying to get rid of the... There we go. But because of the surplus, there would have been downward pressure on the prices. If the price was falling, then quantity demanded would rise, quantity supplied would fall. And that would happen until it got to equilibrium. Again, the point of a price floor is that none of that happens. You're stuck in that perpetual surplus. Okay, so what remains to this is I believe a appendix as well to this chapter. I'm going to break that up into a separate lecture, but for now I'm just going to leave this as this is right now. Okay.